Okay, these are leg muscles, right? So in your packet, we've already been kind of taking notes in this style where we work through the packet, we write a few things down about specific muscles, and then you make sure that you've labeled them on your diagram. So if you're an A student, you have completed head and neck muscles, and that's about it. If you are a B student, you have done everything except for legs. So today, everyone will take leg muscle notes. And then A students, when I see you on Monday, we will get ourselves caught up with the rest of the packet to be on the same playing field, same spot as our B day students. So let's start in our leg packet with the first mentioning or the first row of your chart. This is called the iliotibial tract. And some of you are familiar with this, calling it your IT band. And so you can see right here on the side of the leg, your IT band extends from the top of your pelvis. So that little small line right there is part of your ilium, and it extends down all the way to your knee. And so your IT band, I like to talk about this for a second because I know a lot of us have either had damage or injury to our IT band, or we are in a sport, we're an athlete, or we just maybe recreationally run, and we know that that IT band can become tight and sometimes needs to be stretched or rolled out before and after activities or games. And so we see the location. It runs down the lateral side of your leg from your pelvis all the way down here to your knee. And really at the very top of it, there is a muscle, and it is called your tensor fascia lata, or your TFL. It is a muscle that is involved in hip extension. So, kind of allowing for your hip to move a little bit. And we see the IT band is the continuation of that muscle. So I'm not going to ask you to identify the tensor muscle, but I will ask you to recognize and identify this long white fiber as your IT band. It helps again with hip movement, particularly hip rotation. The next muscle that we're going to look at, I don't believe it's the very next one in your chart. Maybe it is. I don't have the chart right here with me, but this is your sartorius muscle. So find in your packet where we see the word sartorius. This is a very long muscle that actually extends from the outside of the hip. It crosses over, sort of makes a little pattern, crosses over and attaches medially to the inside of your knee. It's the longest muscle in our body, and it's long because it really crosses over. So it has attachments all the way from the ilium, which again is in our pelvis, down to our tibia, which is just below our knee right here. You can see it better in this diagram. So it's actually much shorter here as she's drawn the leg up. She contracted it and drew the leg up, and it is long right here, and you could see it would attach down to the tibia. So it crosses over your leg from lateral to medial, and it helps to flex our knee, and something called abduct. So abduction is what you see in this diagram when you are moving that leg or that limb away from the body. You are abducting that limb, and so that is hip abduction. This is also sometimes called the dancer's muscle, and so this diagram I feel like might make you think of dancing, and is part of why I picked that. But there is our sartorius, a very thin, small, skinny, not small, skinny muscle that runs from the outside of our body to the inside. Oh, there's a shorthand definition for abduction, moving that limb away from your body. All right, let's look at what is sometimes referred to as our groin muscle. It is called the gracilis, and you can see the arrow pointing to it. It's this very small inner thigh muscle. So it's long and thin. It runs down the medial side of your leg, often referred to as our groin muscle, and it's going to help as well in flexing the hip and also flexing the knee. So remember, flexion means that we are decreasing the angle, right? So when we flex that knee, we are decreasing the angle at that joint. If we flex our leg or our hip, we are bringing it back in towards the body. So abduction is another term that helps us to see exactly what mechanism of flexion is occurring towards the hip, related to the hip. So abduction is the opposite of what we saw just a second ago. So abductor muscles will pull your limb back towards your body. Gracilis works opposite to the sartorius. All right, now we're moving into our quad muscles. So our quadriceps, these are, quad as a prefix means four. These are four muscles on the front of our leg. And so we'll talk about superficial to deep. We'll talk about the rectus femoris first. And so this whole kind of area right here, this muscle, and one underneath of it, that will give us our four quad muscles. So rectus femoris is this really, really big one right here on top. So it's the most superficial. It is the largest of your quad muscles, and it sits right in the middle of your leg. And usually when you kind of flex your quad muscles, you're seeing a little bump right here, a bump right here, and then a large bump on top. You're seeing three of your four quad muscles flexing. So we'll talk about the collective function of all of the quadricep muscles once I've told you about each one. So here's the rectus femoris. Again, we'll come back for function in just a second. Let's look at, so actually I'm going to go back to this picture. So rectus femoris is your big one. You can kind of remember our femur is our big leg bone right here. So rectus femoris is on the front side of our leg. And then these two muscles are lateralis muscles. And so, or I'm sorry, they're vastus muscles. And so you have a vastus muscle that runs on the lateral side of the leg, and you have a vastus muscle that runs on the medial side of the leg. So our next two are vastus muscles. If we talk about the lateral, this is the vastus lateralis. So again, it's the front of the leg. It's very superficial. It runs right beside the rectus, but on the lateral side. It is one of our quad muscles. The other vastus is the vastus medialis. It runs on the medial side of your leg. So vastus medialis, superficial, medial to the rectus femoris. Again, our third quad muscle. Now here's our last quad muscle. You have to cut and reflect back, which means you have to remove that big rectus femoris that we started with to see the fourth quad muscle. This is a vastus muscle, but it sits between the lateralis and the medialis. So it's like in the middle, an intermediate. So it's given the term intermedius. So it is deep to the rectus. And it is located, if we remove the rectus, we find it located in between the lateralis and the medialis, which gives it its name, the intermedius. It is the intermediate muscle to the other two vastus muscles. So those are your four quad muscles. You have a rectus femoris, and then you have three vastus muscles, two that you can see, one that sits underneath the big rectus muscle. So then collectively, let's talk about what all quad muscles do together. They are going to work to extend your knee, which is critical in pretty much any movement that we're going to do, walking, running, jumping. We have to have knee extension. And so right now, wherever you are, I want for you to kind of, if your leg is bent, I want you to kick out your knee. Flex that quad muscle and feel it. Feel your quad muscle flex and notice that in flexing, it straightens your leg essentially. So you're extending your knee as you flex your quad muscles. Now, the antagonist to the quad muscles are the hamstring muscles, which we talked in class. There is no actual hamstring muscle name, but it's a collection of muscles on the back of our leg that are going to do the opposite motion of what we just did with our quad. So instead of extending the knee like our quadricep muscles did, when we contract our hamstring muscles on the back of our leg, they will flex our knee, which are equally beneficial in the same actions of walking, running, jumping. You have to do both. So let's talk hamstring muscles. All right. So you have three back here that we're going to know or learn. One is called your semitendinosus muscle. So find that section on your chart. And notice I have made the T in this large and I've underlined it. So you might do that. Highlight the T or underline the T in this word on your chart because this muscle is going to end in a big long tendon, and that will help us to identify it on the diagram. So this right here, I guess if we kind of pause for a second, this is the back of your knee. You have one really large muscle on the lateral side, and then you have a couple of thin, skinny muscles on the medial side. That first skinny muscle, if you track it all the way down about right here, it turns into a white stringy tendon that goes all the way down to your tibia. So that is our semitendinosus. It ends in a big long tendon on the back side, right? The posterior side of our upper leg. It is one of our three hamstring muscles. The next hamstring is a little more medial, and this is called the it's called the semimembranosus. So I forgot the M and the I here of semi. Got so excited about that M, but I would do the same thing. I would find the M of membranosus and highlight it, underline it, make that M stand out because the M is a clue. The M tells you that it ends in this kind of membrane right here, this white membrane, and it tells you that it sits more medial than the other semi muscle, the semitendinosus. So this one, still posterior upper leg muscle, ends in a large white piece of connective tissue. So there's our M. Semimembranosus ends in a large white membrane, connective tissue membrane. And another clue for the M, it is the most medial of the three hamstring muscles. It sits right beside the one that we just saw. The other semi muscle, which was called the semitendinosus, is thin and ends in a long tendon. Move one medial and you get the semimembranosus, which ends in this white connective tissue membrane. So that is the second of our hamstring muscles. And here is our third and final hamstring muscle, the big guy that is more medial or more lateral compared to the other two that we've seen. So this is the largest of all three of the hamstring muscles. It is the most lateral, and it is called the bicep femoris. So I know that that's weird. We learned our bicep brachii. If you're a B day student, we've already lectured over the bicep brachii. If you're an A day student, you might be thinking, wait, Miss Mack, I thought your bicep was in your arm. You do have a bicep in your arm, your bicep brachii. This is a bicep in your leg, and it's called your bicep femoris. Both biceps help to flex the joint that they're attached to, right? So this will help flex the knee, and your bicep on your arm will help flex your elbow. So collectively, again, all three hamstring muscles work together to flex your knee. And keep in mind, they are antagonists to your quad muscles that we just saw. So those are the big muscles of the upper leg. Let's talk about your gluteus maximus, right? So your butt muscle, right? You have a couple of gluteus maximus. We're just going to learn the big ones, the one that are most superficial, the largest of your gluteal muscles. And as a function, your glutes support your pelvis, and they also really help stabilize your core. So if you remember back in our skeletal unit, we talked about lordosis or sway back conditions where your lower lumbar has an exaggerated curve. One of the ways to help correct that is actually strengthening your gluteal muscles. So I'll go back. In addition to supporting walking and running, it can also help strengthen our core, can be a strengthening muscle to our core, which can even at times pull our skeleton back into proper corrective alignment. Let's move down to our lower leg. So let's look at the muscle on the primary muscle on the front of the lower leg. Actually, I think I'm going to show you two, and then we'll look at muscles on the back of the leg. So the front big leg muscle right here being indicated, this is called your tibialis. So remember, tibia is your big, long shin bone right here. This is your tibialis anterior, large muscle on the front of your lower leg. This allows you to pull your foot up, to kind of lift your foot when you are walking. So damage to your tibialis or to any of these tendons down here that are helping to attach the tibialis or support the tibialis would cause your foot to kind of drop and drag your toes on the ground as you walk, which is not good. Now the next muscle, if we kind of look at the leg from a side view, here's our tibialis, the one that we just saw most superficial. If we go a muscle deeper, we see this skinny little muscle that comes all the way down, ends in a white connective tissue, tendons out into our toes. So this is called your extensor digitorum longus. If you were with me for arm muscles in class this past week, you learned that there's actually an extensor digitorum that goes down into your fingers as well. Same thing, there's one that goes down into your toes. So this is actually just below the tibialis, and it extends down into tendons that go out into each of our toes. And this will help us to draw our toes up. Next muscle, if we keep working our way back, so our first one, we had tibialis. This is almost like a little sandwich here. We had tibialis anterior as our top bun. Then we've got a little bit of the extensor digitorum next, maybe like our lettuce. Here comes the next muscle, which is pretty big and makes a connection back here to the back of your foot. This is your fibularis. So your fibularis sits underneath the extensor digitorum, and it is going to work opposite of the tibialis and the digitorum. Instead of lifting the foot and lifting the toes, this is going to help in dropping the foot and dropping the toes. So fibularis, here it is, connecting to the back of the foot. We start to see some antagonistic motion. Now, this next muscle, you can really only see if you get the calf muscle out of the way. This is called your plantaris. And so it's very, very skinny. You can see a little bit of it attaches up here to the top of the femur, but most of it is a tendon that runs down, 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 and makes a connection down here at the base of your foot. So it's on the posterior of your leg. It runs from knee to heel, right? So your knee joint down to your heel. It is under your gastrocnemius, so it's difficult to see, but in your diagram, your full muscle diagram, the best place to see is to kind of look up here in the back of the knee, and you can see it attach here in the back of the knee. We don't really know terribly much about the motor function of this muscle, but it does serve a sensory function, which is kind of interesting because most muscles typically have a motor function. But this one is going to provide some sensory feedback. This muscle will provide some sensory feedback to your brain about the positioning of your foot, which is going to help you, of course, in any motion that you're going to make with your foot. In medical school, this is often dissected out and mistaken as a nerve because so much of it is a tendon. So much of it ends in this white tendon piece. Very little of it is actually muscle. And so sometimes it's referred to as the freshman nerve, meaning that freshmen, upon first encounter, misidentify it. So that's kind of a little fun fact for you. So plantaris, we find it on the back of the leg just below the calf muscle, and we know that it's going to actually give us some sensory information about positioning of the foot. Not last one. You have two more, the soleus and the gastrocnemius. So the soleus is directly under your calf muscle. And so here in your picture, this is the calf muscle. Here is that plantaris that we just saw a second ago. If you get rid of that calf muscle, you see a big, broad, flat muscle right underneath of it called the soleus. So the soleus is helping us again in planting our foot, something called plantar flexion, pointing our foot down. So if you point your toes, you are flexing your soleus. And our last muscle is, important in running and jumping. Our last muscle is our calf muscle. And so the calf muscle is the most superficial on the posterior of the body. And it has these sort of two parts to it, and then a big tendon sheath right here, and aponeurosis. So when you flex your calf muscle, you're looking at the bottom of these two muscles sort of balling up, and then this goes flat. So the absolute end of this tendon sheath is something called your Achilles tendon, if you've ever heard of that. And it will, as a muscle, assist in planting your foot or flexing your foot. So it is your calf and your soleus and your fibularis even. Those muscles are working as antagonists to the muscles we saw on the front of the leg, your tibialis anterior and your extensor. The front leg muscles are pulling up your foot. The back leg muscles are planting your foot. I'm going to zip back here really quickly to this picture right here, right? So we left off with our fibularis. That next muscle deep would be our soleus. And here is the bottom bun of our sandwich, which is our calf muscle. So if we look at the leg from the side, there's a lot of these really thin muscles, but kind of maybe turn it sideways. Think of it as a sandwich. On the top, you have your bun, which is your tibialis anterior. Then you've got your lettuce, right, which is your extensor digitorum. And then maybe you got a little cheese, which is your fibularis, on top of your meat, which is your soleus. And then you got your bottom bun, which is your gastrocnemius, your calf muscle. So there they are, kind of in order from front to back, all of those leg muscles. The only one that you can't see here in this diagram is that funny plantaris muscle, which again, best view of that is looking at the back of the knee and finding that little tiny muscle that creeps up in the back of the knee. Okay, you are finished with leg muscles.